pioneer, who has been maybe the first main entrepreneur to say APIs will be a big thing. We need company, we need the tools, we need an ecosystem to make it happen. So it's Chet Kapoor. Hello, Chet. How are you doing today?
Hello, Beatty. Thank you very much for having me here. Doing great.
Yeah, again, it's an honor to have you. You're extremely busy, but because of this remote ability with online conferences, we can have some of your time. Thank you very much for being there with us. I invite you to share your slide and enjoy 20 minutes with us on the virtual stage. Thank you very much, Chet.
Thank you, Mehdi. Folks, thank you very much for the opportunity to spend some time with you and talk to you about APIs the next 10 years. For those of you in the audience that see Next spelled differently, it's because you'll see in a moment. I started my career at a company called Next that was between Steve Jobs, Apple, to Next to Apple, and so I cannot help myself but spell it that way. I was trying to get creative on the title, and I decided that the best title was the title of the conference itself. And so let's get going on this. Let me start by just a 10-second thing. I had a chance to work at Next. Did a company called Active Software. Some of you may not remember it, but it was one of the pioneers of what we fondly call enterprise application integration, having helped create an industry there. Did a company called BEA, and then open source company that was acquired by IBM. Joined Apigee in the very early days, pre-product, pre-revenue, and that's where we actually created the API management industry. Had a chance to take it public. Google Cloud acquired it, and it was a Google Cloud for 2 years. Transitioned it over, did some things in the education space at Google, and then about 2.5 years ago joined DataStax. So it's been an exciting ride. Across everything I've done, I've always been in the what I call septic tank cleaning space, in the infrastructure space, primarily in the middleware space, but now very deeply in the data side. So I'm going to, the way I've segmented the presentation is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, the history of APIs. And this is just more a personal thing myself. Recently, with everything going on in the world, with wars, with pandemics and things like that, this is one of the best ways to get through this is to actually think about how people dealt with all these different things in the past. And so I've been spending a lot of time just reading what's happened over the last 1,000 years. And I thought it might help the audience to actually give you a perspective on the making of the API industry itself and how we saw it. Right? We were not just in the front seat. We were actually driving the car. Right. And so I'll walk through that. I'll talk a little bit about the future of APIs. And then I can't help myself, but actually talk a little bit about data and how APIs and data come together. So again, thanks very much for the opportunity. Let's get started. So I thought this was appropriate on the history part on Confucius, right? Study the past if you want to define the future. And that it just the words he uses is so specific. Right, it won't define the future, but if you would define the future, and I thought this was very appropriate, and I wanted to start my presentation with this quote. So let's talk about the making of the API industry. A long time ago, hopefully, some of you remember some of this. When we were hanging around, sitting around a conference room, talking about where the world was going, we got inspiration from a lot of people in the industry. And I would love to sit down here and say, stand here and say, hey, we thought about this and came up with it, but we got a lot of inspiration and a lot of help. So the first one was the Google Maps API, right? It came out, I don't remember the exact dates, but it was long before the API management space came about. And we were just floored on how beautiful it was and how they took the maps world and said it needs to be available through an API. We were just floored by what they did. And so we were like, wow, that's interesting. And this is while turn by turn directions were coming out and things like that. So super interesting. That was very helpful. The one that really got us going into the API space was actually the Twitter API. For those of you that may not remember, because were thinking about, Twitter, Elon Musk, things like that. But a long time ago, Twitter was just an API. They didn't actually have an interface at all. There was no mobile app. There was no web app. In fact, there was an entire industry of apps that you could get that actually all plugged into the Twitter API feed. And you went out and tweeted from those different apps with different experiences. There were an entire cottage industry around it. And we really wanted to do something with Twitter. And since there were a lot of people developing apps around Twitter, we said the best thing to do was actually start with a Twitter API console. We spent a lot of time with Twitter, came up with a console, and people actually loved it. And this is, I'm dating myself, but this is 2008, 2009. Right, they got super excited, and that was, by the way, the beginning of what called Apigee and how it got started. The thing that helped us quite a bit was, and I wanted to say that this is the web services, the Amazon Web Services mandate, and I specifically wanted to say it because for those of you who are students of history, you should go back and look at Jeff Bezos's quote. Basically said, all inter-process communication will happen through services, and people who don't do it through web services will not work at Amazon. And that, by the way, was the beginning of what Andy Jassy went off and actually started with doing with AWS. And that actually fundamentally changed how they built. And now, obviously, they were not doing RESTful stuff. They were doing SOAP in the beginning, but that actually changed how people communicated internally to build very complex systems. And we thought that was very intriguing to us. After the Twitter API, the next big thing that happened that actually really, really helped us was the introduction of the iPhone. And we thought this was actually phenomenal because the way you do APIs, we were like, let's go to every iPhone meetup and let's go off and actually talk about APIs. And we actually did that, and no one listened to us. It was really interesting. Because you didn't need an API for Angry Birds because the app actually was just sitting on the phone. There was no cloud service that they were accessing. So we were a little early to the market. But what happened after that was that the second generation of iPhone apps started actually putting stuff in the cloud, and they would have the app on the phone. And that's when APIs really came into play. And so please don't underestimate how much mobile actually drove the API space, right? Twitter was our inspiration, but mobile is what drove it. And what mobile led to was this beautiful thing called digital transformation, right? Because the web native companies went off and actually built their generation 1 and generation 2 apps. But what a lot of the existing companies realized was they actually had to go off and transform their businesses. They started by talking about mobile being an adjunct, just like they did with web commerce, and very soon realized that the app was the center of how people wanted to interact with them. So we attached ourselves first to mobile, then obviously to digital transformation, and that's when it started becoming something a lot of people paid a lot of attention to. And then we started thinking a lot about platform business models because of our experience with Twitter. Looking at how Maps was doing things, and lots of really good examples. And so we started spending some time with people like Marshall. I know he was here, had a keynote yesterday. And so we started thinking about how you get network effects with APIs, because it's not about the APIs you use internally. It's not just the ones that you actually use with your B2B partners. It's not the ones you use to actually fuel your B2C, but it's also about what you do from a business to a developer outside, right? And actually have an open API that people can do different things with. So all those things, that is how the API management space came about. So it was super interesting. And along the way, we had a lot of help, right? There was a small company called Netflix in 2009 that said they would work with a little company called Apigee. There was a company called MTV that said, we really like your stuff, but we only want it in the cloud. We started using AWS in 2009 as well. And then a company called AT&T came about and said, you're a $250,000 company, and we're going to write you a $10 million check because APIs are how we are going to change our business. But one of the most intriguing examples was Walgreens, because Walgreens had a photo sharing API. And they actually after they built their photo sharing API with actually made it available to different people in different kinds of apps, where you could actually go to all these different apps that aggregated photos. You could actually print to Walgreens. They had a direct correlation between people who actually printed using the photo API and the amount they spend in the stores, because it actually had a lot of flow traffic coming in. And that was Walgreens was one of our poster child on how APIs can actually affect your top line and your bottom line. So lots of help along the way. So so that's a little bit of the history, for those of you that care about how that came about. But what were the key insights, right? Every industry that happens in the world, you don't have 20 things, right? What were the 2 or 3 key insights that happened? So the first one was, it is about consumption, right? And it was not us, by the way. It started with Maps, started with Twitter, a bunch of things. But our realization was, it's not about the back-end people coming up and throwing up and saying, here are the 10 APIs, and this covers the surface area of a backend, go for it. It was actually focusing on what the developer needed to make things happen, and focusing on that particular API that actually made all the difference, and really curating it so that it was consumable, right? The second big insight we had was the digital value chain. If I can draw it virtually, here's a customer that is using a mobile app that is built by a developer that accesses an API, and that API is actually built by the API team, right? And in that, the API team uses the backend to make that happen. So it was super interesting that we put the digital value chain together, and a lot of people didn't think of APIs and the API team actually being in the middle of it, right? And so that was one of our big insights. I'm sure you've seen the digital value chain in many forms used by many, many different people. And then the third one was API products, right? APIs are products. Every company in the world actually has a concept of a product, right? And so even if you're in the services business, you have a concept product. And we wanted to make sure that people didn't think of APIs as projects. Back to the showing up and throwing up. How do you actually make sure that this shows up as a product? And you think about, how do you evangelize the product? Who's a product manager for the API product? Who is the engineering team? And that stays with that, right? That concept was really, 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 really awesome. So that was the third piece that we did really well. The fourth one was the thing that I talked about with Walgreens, which was APIs having direct business impact and making it happen, right? And companies like Walgreens, AT&T, and T-Mobile, so many others that actually organize themselves around the API products to make that happen was absolutely, how do you take this concept called API products and actually do a direct correlation to business impact? And what we did along the way was spent a bunch of time with Marshall, right? And Marshall, was thinking a lot about platform effects in a massive way. We started this a while ago with him, and I had a chance to meet him 2 weeks ago. By the way, this is his slides from his presentation to all of you yesterday. But this was one that I wanted to share with, obviously with his permission, about the technology use cases, right? If you did no APIs, you lost market share. This was research that was done over a 5-6 year period, right? We made a lot of data available. They went and got a lot of data from different companies. But if you had no APIs, you lost market share. If you had internal use cases only, right, you had small gains, but you did have gains, right? It did make a difference on how you worked and things like that. But the best part was when you had external use cases, right? The external use cases were, you do it for your supply chain, you do it for your demand chain with customers, but you also do it for innovation. Because quite frankly, a lot of people keep forgetting, right, that innovation does not only happen in the cathedral. Every company doesn't always know what is the best way for their products to be used. Making it available to the world, i.e. the bazaar, makes all the difference. And so that's where the 38% growth comes from, making it happen. So now, moving on, to the present day, digital transformations continue. App modernization is where it started. I talked about that earlier. Obviously, cloud is, and by the way, that continues. It's still happening. Cloud is actually taken off in a massive way. There are companies like AWS that are $60 billion, people like GCP that are $20+ billion, and Azure is doing really, really well. And then we actually believe, and this is not a skewed view, but this is how I think a lot of our customers think about it, is that data is Act 3, and it's the final. A lot of people think about it as the final. It's the last mile, right, in making it happen. Please do not think of this as Act 1 is already done or Act 2 is already done. This is about all three acts happening at the same time. So we find that really interesting. So let's go back to talking about the future of APIs. So in our mind, the future of API has got to do with security. So let's talk about that. APIs and infrastructure that deliver them APIs have officially become the #1 security exploit vector in 2021. Yes, APIs are absolutely, and I'm sure there's some sessions and things like that where APIs are responsible for managing nearly every interaction in the digital system at scale, right? So developers and engineers across open source and commercial products are having to act very differently around security features. This is not a nice to have, it has become a must have. And I think we are definitely going to expect the API products to deliver zero trust security principles in their products, right? There's no way around it. It absolutely has to happen. The second thing is intelligent APIs. And this is something we started talking about even 3.5-4 years ago, right? That we are going to shift from having single fine-grained request response type interactions with single systems, and we're going to go to APIs that actually represent multiple APIs, multiple systems, multiple data platforms, right? So that you can aggregate and enrich responses from many sources in parallel. And the intelligence part is there's no reason why you cannot have ML actually make that happen. So this is something that I think is absolutely coming. I think a bunch of the API companies are actually making that happen. It's been something that a lot of people have been thinking about. And so you're going to find that this shows up not only the way you build APIs, but it's going to show up in what the product companies actually show up with, right? The third one is adoption across all styles. For us, it was really simple, right? A decade ago or even more. 15 years ago, it was simple. We just said, hey, listen, SOAP is hard, REST is great. So it was just, we provide some mediation and move from there. There's a lot that's happened. GraphQL is out there today, right? gRPC is out there today. And so the point is that, adoption of APIs will happen through all different styles. And the goal here is to make it developer friendly, right? As you go forward. So I think we absolutely believe that that's going to happen across the board in many, many different ways. And today it's GraphQL and gRPC and REST and JSON, but over the next decade, I think there'll be some other styles that show up as well. We think, I certainly think, and funny, I was talking to somebody just this morning, as technologists, we have this tendency to believe that, we built this industry or we built this market 5, 7, 10 years ago. Guess what? It actually takes about 20 years, right? I mean, EAI, for those of you that are students, was actually formed in October of 1998, right? And it is still going very, very strong. The patterns are still there between you take a bus architecture, hub spoke architecture, whatever you want to do, talk about all the different things about logic and mediation and everything else, right? Still going very strong. There are multiple generations of companies that have been formed. Linux has been going on for so long. So we're going to see, we are not even halfway through what is going to happen with APIs. In fact, I would actually bet that the next time or the next 2 years, this API Days comes up and Mehdi puts up a slide, the numbers will be at least double, if not triple, right? I think we're going to continue to make that happen. And the reason that will happen is because of the exponential growth across the board, right? Whether it is APIs on, really mini APIs on IoT devices, it is on monolithical services, whatever else it might be, but APIs are going to just grow like super crazy. So I want to take a little. This something went. Just 1 second. I want to take a little detour and talk about data. The reason there's an arrow that says data going to real-time data is because I think data is a very big space. And a lot of people think about data. We think about the data in two parts. One is data actually that is at the deep lane, where data is actually made available to an analyst. And then the fast lane, what we affectionately call the real-time data side. So I'm going to give you some observations on the real-time data part and how it actually applies, and you'll see me bring it together for data and APIs moving forward. So the first thing is companies are creating a virtuous cycle for themselves by fueling real-time apps with real-time data, right? This is something I'm sure all of you see, right? And what matters here is customers care. You, I, we all care about real-time interactions, right? We don't want to wait. I mean, we don't have the patience to wait for 2 minutes for a response, right? If you do a loan application, we wait 30 seconds and we want a response right away. That's all real time. And I don't mean real time nanoseconds. I mean like real time in the human sense, not in the system sense, right? Obviously, there's a system sense of it as well. But the leaders, right, are focusing on this virtual cycle, right? They win with all of the data. They create apps that have intelligence. They have fast actions that are fueled by ML and AI. And all of that comes from more and more data that is being collected, making that happen. We see this across the board, right? I get a chance to spend a lot of time with developers and CIOs and making that happen. So what are the key insights we see, much like we did? And by the way, this is work in progress. It's not a decade in the works, like the API insights are. But what are the key insights we see today? We see there are many, many users of data, right? There are no limits on how you use and reuse them. And so it is just amazing how data is absolutely exploding, right, and making it happen. Data does not care if it is in motion or if it's at rest, right? Developers really just want access to data to make sure they have smart, intelligent, real-time apps, right? That's what they care about. They actually don't care whether it's in a database, whether it's in a stream, whether it's in ABC or XYZ, right? They just want access to data. And as technologists, we have to worry about the patterns, because whether is it key value store, is it relational database, is it a pub sub kind of a thing? We have to think about that, but finding a way to abstract that is becoming increasingly important, and something that a lot of people are focusing on. The third one is data availability. We talk about, for those of you who are just in the API world, API availability is a big deal, right? Data needs to be available to people and to systems, right? Because we are getting to a point where systems are going to start making decisions. They already, we are going with this concept of we are going from a knowledge worker to a creative worker, because a bunch of stuff that the knowledge worker did with system is actually happening, right? Is actually happening by systems themselves. So data really needs to be available to people and systems in a very easy way. And the last thing, when we're spending a bunch of time with folks like Marshall, some folks from Harvard Business School, on how data is an asset on a balance sheet. Large companies like Verizon actually think about, they actually take the data they have in the consumer division and give a value to it, right? And I think over a period of time, in a very short, it's not like years, maybe a couple of years, you will see that data shows up as an asset on a balance sheet moving forward. And I think that'll be a massive, massive win. So lots of discussion about the history of APIs, the key insights on API, how it evolved. We talked a little bit about the insights on the data side, but what is the future of APIs and data, right? Number one, I don't want anybody to forget that APIs are products, right? If there was one key thing that you would take away, it's not the digital value chain. It is obviously the consumability. It is obviously the network effects, all of that. But if you start thinking about APIs as products, you will be way ahead. And you should hold that to be true for everything you do. The second one is data is an asset, right? It is an asset that needs to be consumable by people and systems, and keep thinking about it as an asset rather than a technology thing, right? And it's not that different from abstracting the the technical thing called an API into thinking about it as a product, we think about data as an asset moving forward, right? And so the asset needs to be governed. It needs to be accessible by people, by systems. You need to build ML systems on top of it and everything else, around it. Exponential growth is going to happen in both. It is absolutely a big part of everything. Data is exploding. We talked about APIs are exploding. And let's never, ever forget that data by itself, the way it becomes productized is through APIs. So a lot of you who are API geeks, right? We used to call them Api geeks a while ago. I'm sure they're called that now as well. Are actually going to become data geeks over a period of time as well, because what you are actually productizing is the data, right? And that is how the world is going to view this moving forward. And my last slide, my all-time favorite sticker at Apigee was the I love API sticker. I thought I would, put a version of it up and say I still love APIs. Apigee and APIs will always be close to my heart, and I will always be a big part of the API industry moving forward. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, Chet, again, we consumed all our time, but again, you can see in the chat, some people say we could hear you all day long. It's so inspiring. And thank you for showing us how things have been in the past to prepare about the future. I will just mention in API Days conferences in 2015, we stopped use API integration and replaced it by API consumption, right? To really show it's a product now. So integration is making things work. No, it's consumption, adding value capabilities. And again, we really want to thank you, because you have been the entrepreneur putting it on the market, So yeah, thank you very much for that.